Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Whoever gets on chat, let me know if the audio is working. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Cursed Wi-Fi, man. Cursed Wi-Fi. Testing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Testing, testing. Oh, audio is good. Okay. Thank you, thank you. All right, we are continuing. Well, actually, let me let me share this real quick. Oh, I forgot to change the stream title. Oh, well, I'll do that later. We're continuing with the Doctrine of Being. We're actually beginning the Doctrine of Being. It's the introductory essay. With what must the beginning of science be made? All right, just making sure everything's good. All right, seems fine. So, paragraph 88. It is only in recent times that there has been a new awareness of the difficulty of finding a beginning in philosophy, and the reason for this difficulty, and so also the possibility of resolving it, have been discussed in a variety of ways. The beginning of philosophy must be either something mediated or something immediate, and it is easy to show that it can neither be the one nor the other. So either way of beginning runs into contradiction. I mean, what is the contradiction? Well, if you begin with something mediated, you're in the middle, so it's not a beginning. A mediated beginning is a beginning with a presupposition, and can't do that. Everybody's going to attack you for presupposing this or that. And then the problem with beginning of something immediate is that, well, if it's immediate, it can have no reason that you can give for why you should begin with it. So it just seems arbitrary. That's the problem. 89. The principle of a philosophy also expresses a beginning, of course, but not so much a subjective as an objective one, the beginning of all things. The principle is a somehow determinate content, water, the one, nous, idea or substance, monad, etc., or if it designates the nature of cognition and is therefore meant simply as a criterion rather than an objective determination as thinking, intuition, sensation, I, even subjectivity, then here too the interest still lies in the content determination. The beginning as such, on the other hand, as something subjective in the sense that it is an accidental way of introducing the exposition, is left unconsidered, a matter of indifference, and consequently also the need to ask with what the beginning should be made remains of no importance in face of the need for the principle in which alone the interest of the fact seems to lie, the interest as to what is the truth, the absolute ground of everything. So whenever Hegel uses principle, he also means it quite literally according to the etymology. A principle is, well, the beginning point. So principle is a beginning. The beginning of a philosophy also expresses a beginning. So the principle, a beginning. Of course, but not so much a subjective as an objective one. The beginning of all things. So, if you look at classical philosophy, the beginning is always a metaphysical principle. Water, one, nous, idea, substance, monad, whatever. All of these are the principle of all things. They are the thing with which we begin. It's not only until you get to, the subjective turn with supposedly Descartes. Well, Descartes is the one who makes it majorly. With, I think, therefore I am, that the principle changes away from a metaphysical thing to cognition. Thinking, intuition, sensation, I, subjectivity, blah, blah, blah. And he says, but here, so in the metaphysical beginning, we're interested in the content of, the thing. And in the epistemological beginning, we're also interested in the content or the form of that thing, cognition, or the I, or subjectivity, whatever it is. The beginning as such, on the other hand, as something subjective in the sense that it is an accidental way of introducing the exposition, is left unconsidered. So the beginning as such, on the other hand, as something subjective in the sense that it is an accidental way of introducing the exposition, is left unconsidered. A matter of indifference, and consequently also the need to ask with what the beginning should be made, remains of no importance in the face of the need of the principle in which alone does the fact seems to lie, the interest to what is the truth, the absolute ground of everything. So everybody's worried about with the thing to begin with, but they're not worried about this question of what the hell is a beginning at all. The beginning as such. And like this, he says, the beginning as such, on the other hand, as something subjective in the sense that it is an accidental way of introducing the exposition. I mean, when you look at the ancient principles of metaphysics, obviously people didn't think that these were accidental. They thought like, oh, we're ascending to the highest genera, from which all things proceed. And so they certainly didn't think that this was accidental or, it was a subjective thing. But given the fact that you had different people beginning with different principles who all said, well, this is the principle, there clearly is something subjective about it. There's also something accidental about it, because if different people are coming to a different conclusion of what is the principle, then it's relative to whatever it is that they're doing, or however they're thinking about it, or however they're perceiving things or intuiting things. It makes it a subjective thing to begin. Continuing, 90. But the modern perplexity about a beginning proceeds from a further need which escapes those who are either busy demonstrating their principle dogmatically or skeptically looking for a subjective criterion against dogmatic philosophizing, and is outright denied by those who begin, like a shot from a pistol, from their inner revelation, from faith, intellectual intuition, etc., and who would be exempt from method and logic. So, I mean, around Hegel's time, particularly at the turn of the 1800s, there was a bit of a popularity with people just claiming, look, I've got divine revelation of some kind. People weren't claiming like God spoke to me or anything, but they were claiming they had this special access of, I just know things, I just know, that there is a transcendental self. I intuit it, and if you don't intuit it, too bad, so sad for you. Sorry, you're kind of metaphysically crippled, man. What can I say? It's that kind of thing. So that these people didn't give you any reason for like why it is that the beginning is the beginning. It's just like you get it or you don't get it. Now there's something to that actually. Once you actually think about it. Now it's not a fair thing to tell people like, look, I got a special insight that you don't. Sorry, I can see and you're blind. You don't have eyes. Sucks to be you. But actually, when you consider and you're talking to enough people, you realize thinking is kind of like that. That there are people out there who you kind of wonder if they have eyes. You kind of wonder if there's a thought in that head. because they don't seem to grasp even the most basic thing, really. So I've had like this kind of a sad insight a few times, in which some people just seem incapable of thought. And I mean, you have to accept, like, thought is a kind of intuition. It's a kind of sense, let's call it a sixth sense or a seventh sense, whatever you want to call it. But some people have it, some people have it less, some people have it more, and some people maybe don't even have it at all. Hard to believe. Of course, you don't proceed by assuming that people don't have it. Insofar as people have it at all, they should be able to do the most basic kind. And I think most people can do something like that, being a nothing thing. But boy, do they make it really hard on themselves. Oh no, it's showing me a stream error. You think that with like the advanced technology of these days, your Wi-Fi would like be fine a room away, but somehow it isn't. All right, stream is still up. Thank you. Anyways, Hegel's not one of those people who's just going to say, look, I just got some divine intuition. He'll explain it rationally. Now, it doesn't mean that you yourself, if you're watching this or reading this book, maybe you're not rational. Who knows? Some people sure aren't. But Hegel's not going to assume that, and insofar as you're rational at all, this book and what's going on should be intelligible regarding this methodology and how we begin and why we should begin. So if earlier abstract thought is at first interested only in the principle as content, but is driven as philosophical culture advances to the other side to pay attention to the conduct of the cognitive process, then the subjective activity has also been grasped as an essential moment of objective truth. And with this, there comes the need to unite the method with the content, the form with the principle. Thus, the principle ought to be also the beginning, and that which has priority for thinking ought to be also the first in the process of thinking. So let me reread that portion. So if earlier abstract thought is at first interested only in the principle as content, but is driven as philosophical culture advances to the other side to pay attention to the conduct of the cognitive process, then the subjective activity has also been grasped as an essential moment of objective truth. And with this, there comes the need to unite the method with the content, the form with the principle. So the principle, again, principle meaning beginning. The beginning is just the metaphysical contents of their stuff. What is it? It's this, it's that. And eventually people realize, well, why is it that we have disagreements on this? Why can't we just come to terms and agree? And then they start paying attention. Well, it seems that, we're doing things differently. So what are we doing? Well, what is our doing? Well, we're thinking. And what is our thinking? What is the valid way to actually go about doing the determining of what there is and how it's there? And so they focus on the cognitive process. That's the subjective side. And the cognitive process is about form. It's not about like a direct content itself. It's like if you think about cognition as empirical, you're thinking about the form of the senses, the forms of, checking the accordance of something in your mind with what's in your senses, what's being reported by them. If you're thinking about it rationally, you're a rationalist, and what you're focusing on is the formality, that, something has to have an identity, something has to be in the right form to be an object. So you're not focused on like this or that specific thing. You're not focused on things are water or things are mind or things are matter. You're focusing on, like these more general categories of form, identity, relationalities, other things that have to be met. But the fact that we have gone from a general standpoint of just principles to a general standpoint of mediating forms shows that there's a necessity there not only of just principles but of this form. And so Hegel is at this standpoint where German idealism has come about historically, and people have realized we got to kind of put these things together. I mean, already with Kant you realize that things have to be put back together, and Kant is trying to do so and say, well, there's the forms of the mind and there's the empirical content of the senses, and these come together to form experience. And experience is both, sensuous and intellectual. It's formal. But Kant just kind of slaps those things together and doesn't really show that they're necessarily together. Whereas once you begin with the German idealists, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, they have the view that these have to come together of their own in some way. Somehow content has to lead to form, form has to lead to content. So thus the principle ought to be also the beginning, and that which has priority for thinking ought to be also the first in the process of thinking. So we have to have a unity of form and principle, but we got to begin with something. So where do we begin? With the principle. Why? Well, because the principle is what it says. It's the beginning. It's much more immediate to notice that there is something than it is to think about how am I relating to that. How is it that I am capable of grasping that there is something? Because now you're in a mediated standpoint. And obviously, just saying there is something is more immediate. Just thinking that, recognizing it is more immediate than thinking about how you're relating to it, the relationship itself. Hopefully that's clear. This thing's still showing me that there is a choppy stream. Let me know if the stream is quality is fine or not. Because if so, I may have to open my door. You'd think that Wi-Fi signals go through doors, especially cheap wooden doors, but I guess not. What the heck? Give me a sec. I'll open my door. All right, hopefully that's better. So anyways, you begin with principles, you begin with what there is first, rather than worrying about how and the why, because all of those are mediations. And at beginning, well, he'll go over it, in the following paragraphs. What he says is actually pretty clever, and it's not just clever, it's true. But it's just kind of amazing how simple it is and how people don't realize it. So 91. Here we only have to consider how the logical beginning appears. The two sides from which it can be taken have already been named, namely either as result by way of mediation or as beginning proper as immediate. So just rereading that, here we only have to consider how the logical beginning appears. Emphasis on appears. Because we're not yet doing logic, and so we're just talking about how it seems. The two sides from which it can be taken have already been named, namely either as a result by way of mediation, which is thinking about it, or thinking about our cognition of it, or as beginning proper as immediate, meaning just point out what there is. 92. This is not the place to discuss the question apparently so important to present-day culture, whether the knowledge of truth is an immediate awareness that begins absolutely a faith, or rather a mediated knowledge. Insofar as the issue allows preliminary treatment, this has already been done elsewhere. In my Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, third edition, in the Prefatory Concepts, section 21. Here we may quote from it only this, that there is nothing in heaven or nature or spirit or anywhere else that does not contain just as much immediacy as mediation, so that both these determinations prove to be unseparated and inseparable, and the opposition between them nothing real. As for a scientific discussion, a case in point is every logical proposition in which we find the determinations of immediacy and immediacy, where there is also entailed therefore a discussion of their opposition and their truth. This opposition, when connected to thinking, to knowledge, to cognition, assumes the more concrete shape of immediate or mediated knowledge, and it is then up to the science of logic to consider the nature of cognition in general, while the more concrete forms of the same cognition fall within the scope of the science of spirit and the phenomenology of spirit. But to want to clarify the nature of cognition prior to science is to demand that it should be discussed outside science. And outside science, this cannot be done, at least not in the scientific manner, which alone is the issue here. So let me reread that. That was a bit of a long paragraph. So this is not the place to discuss the question apparently so important to present-day culture. Whether the knowledge of truth is an immediate awareness that begins absolutely a faith, or rather mediated knowledge. So this is the question of like, well, what is the principle of knowledge? What is knowledge anyways? This issue was already dealt with in the phenomenology spirit. Like that's what the phenomenology spirit is all about and more. If one can talk about preliminary treatments, he talks about it in the Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences, which is good. You should read those introductions. I think it's like called the modes of objectivity. I can't remember the exact title, but they're worth reading. I have some part of it on the site here. On my channel, you can just look up the Encyclopedia of Logic introductions. It'll be there. So here we quote from it only this, that there is nothing in heaven or nature or spirit or anywhere else that does not contain just as much immediacy as mediation, so that both these determinations prove to be unseparated and inseparable, and the opposition between them nothing real. So, I mean, typical Hegel fashion. It's both. It's both and neither. Mostly both. Contradiction. As for a scientific discussion, a case in point is every logical proposition in which we find the determinations of immediacy, and where there is also entailed, therefore, a discussion of their opposition and their truth. So, every concept is going to be an example of immediacy and mediation. So, you can talk about immediacy and mediation in every single one of them, which he often does. So this opposition, when connected to thinking, to knowledge, to cognition, assumes the more concrete shape of immediate or mediated knowledge, and it is then up to the science of logic to consider the nature of cognition in general, while the more concrete forms of the same cognition fall within the scope of the science of spirit and the phenomenology of spirit. So these words, thinking, knowledge, cognition, they actually mean something very specific. They're not what people normally think, but if you think that they're what people normally think, you're probably around 50% correct. So you're not too bad. The problem is that if you've read the Phenomenology of Spirit, what these mean has already been expanded far beyond what they normally mean. And obviously the science of logic begins with a presumption, partially, that, you might have read the Phenomenology of Spirit. You don't have to have read it, but you might have read it. You might already know what these words mean in far better detail. Thinking is just a process of determination. Obviously, as far as thinking concepts, this will look one way. As far as thinking about, or rather thinking through specific content, say thinking about, what is a pig, what is a dog, what is a cat, those things are going to look different than thinking about a pure concept. And yet thinking is just this process of determinacy. If you talk about, the pig is a zygote and whatever, gets fertilized. Actually, no, zygote is already fertilized, isn't it? It's an egg, it's a gamete, sperm and egg meet, they get fertilized, become a zygote, become a fetus, blah, blah, blah. That's order of events of how things are being set up and determined, what is cause and effect. These are thinking. That's just what thinking is. Thinking is this exposition of this determining process. Knowledge is just the structure of the determinate process. And cognition is just the name of a form of consciousness which apprehends pure conceptuality. The Phenomenology of Spirit's final form of consciousness is called absolute knowing, which is also called science, which is also called cognition. And the final chapter, the final general section of the science of logic is a section on cognition. the idea as cognition, which is theoretical cognition, and practical cognition, and absolute idea is absolute cognition. And all cognition means is thinking. It's a fancy word for thinking. It's a Latin word for thinking, you know. Thinking comes from the German denke, and cognition comes from, cogitare, which is Latin. They both mean thinking. So while the more concrete forms of the same cognition fall within the scope of the science of spirit, so the science of spirit would be what's that called? Well, it's the philosophy. He calls it the philosophy of spirit, particularly in the subjective spirit, and the science of logic, which is technically the end, but also the beginning. And within the philosophy of spirit, there is a section on the phenomenology of spirit, which deals only with what is in the first 4 chapters of the phenomenology. That whole section called consciousness, and then there's a section along with that, which is a section on what I would call finite cognition. But most people think, when they think about thinking and concepts and cognition, they think about what's going on in our heads, what's going on in our minds. And that's what that section is about. It's about representation, the buildup of memory, and how you get theoretical cognition and then practical cognition. And that's the final shift to objective spirit, which is social reality. But to want to clarify the nature of cognition prior to science is to demand that it should be discussed outside science, and, well, you can't do that, because cognition is science, and we got to talk about it scientifically. So, let me check. The relation of the logic to the phenomenology of spirit, 93. The beginning is logical in that it is to be made in the element of a free, self-contained thought, in pure knowledge. It is thereby mediated, for pure knowledge is the ultimate and absolute truth of consciousness. We said in the introduction that the phenomenology of spirit is the science of consciousness, its exposition. That consciousness has the concept of science, that is, pure knowledge, for its result. To this extent, logic has for its presupposition the science of spirit in its appearance, a science which contains the necessity and therefore demonstrates the truth of the standpoint which is pure knowledge and of its mediation. In this science of spirit in its appearance, the beginning is made from empirical sensuous consciousness, and it is this consciousness which is immediate knowledge in the strict sense. Therefore, in this science is where its nature is discussed. Any other consciousness, such as faith in divine truths, inner experience, knowledge through inner revelation, etc., proves upon cursory reflection to be very ill-suited as an instance of immediate knowledge. In the said treatise, immediate consciousness is also that which in the science comes first and immediately, and is therefore a presupposition. But in logic, the presupposition is what has proved itself to be the result of that preceding consideration, namely the idea as pure knowledge. As to be the result of that preceding consideration, namely the idea as pure knowledge. So this is one of those interesting little seemingly contradictory things that people point out of like, well, wait a minute, how is this supposed to be a presuppositionless beginning when Hegel here is telling us that we're presupposing the phenomenology of spirit? How does that make any sense? Well, I just finished a few days ago a complete commentary on the final chapter of the phenomenology of spirit, absolute knowledge, absolute knowing. And it's the first time I've gone through it completely with proper thinking. I did do a really quick overview read that's on the live streams, but that wasn't, that very careful. I just kind of was winging it, just kind of seeing what I could draw out of it on my own, like on a quick, superficial read, which you could still draw quite a lot, if you know how to read stuff of the speculative kind. But I took more care over the last 2 weeks. I finally got through the entire chapter, and this whole relationship became a lot clearer now with that in mind. So let me reread that. So the beginning is logical in that it is to be made in the element of free, self-contained thought in pure knowledge. The end of the phenomenology is the transcendence of the structure of consciousness. Consciousness is that which is a knower that knows something that is not itself qualitatively, something that is beyond consciousness, and consciousness is just the structure of knowledge itself. But it's not pure knowledge, because the assumption of consciousness is that its knowledge is just representational, that it's always just a representation of some other thing that is beyond thought, that's more than thought. But at the end, with absolute knowing, we've collapsed that whole problem. That whole distinction just no longer works. And what you have is just a knowing of knowing, which, guess what? Well, it's not a knowing of something else. It's not knowing of something that's beyond knowledge, because it's just a knowing of knowing, or a knowledge of knowledge. So it's pure knowledge. It's absolute knowledge for that reason. And it's not a structure of consciousness anymore, because it's not holding another that is other to itself. Qualitatively, it is thereby mediated, for pure knowledge is the ultimate absolute truth of consciousness. So the mediation is the fact that it's gone through this process of, purification. So we didn't just begin with this immediate assumption. We had to prove this kind of immediacy, as opposed to the assumed immediacy of the beginning of the phenomenology spirit, which is sense certainty. So we said in the introduction, the phenomenology spirit is the science of consciousness, its exposition, that consciousness has the concept of science, that is pure knowledge, for its result. So this is something interesting in that I'm going to put out the commentary fully for free on my blog. It's going to be, as far as I'm aware, the most in-depth commentary on this chapter. Both publicly and privately available. I don't think there's any other academic that has released a full commentary on this, and I'm definitely taking a position that's different. The main positions you find about absolute knowledge are one, it's unintelligible, nobody gets it, it's incomplete. Hegel didn't even finish it properly, he rushed it, so whatever. Even he didn't know what he was saying. Another one is a very weird one, which is like people like Jay Bernstein say that the way they interpret it is that it ends up skeptical, that absolute knowledge is just the position that actually in the end, we can't know anything because everything's relative to the subject historically, and so everything's ever shifting. So there really isn't such a thing as knowledge. It's all just shifting in accordance to spirit. So there's nothing to be known. I don't know how he got that interpretation at all. Maybe Adorno believes that, because Jay Bernstein is a follower of Adorno and negative dialectics. So maybe Adorno is a bad influence on people and fries their brains. Maybe Adorno's brains were fried. I don't know. That's just it's just you can't read that chapter and read the text and tell me that's actually what it means. It's beyond ridiculous. Probably Zizek has some negative thing to say about it, it also ends in some kind of skepticism. That would be utterly bizarre. A bit more defensible and saying knowledge is always open. We'll never know the full absolute. It's always radically falling apart. Okay, that still doesn't work with the chapter. That's not what the chapter itself says. The chapter very much emphatically says that it has something positive. Hegel himself is saying something here that there is something positive. Somebody like Richard Dean Winfield, for example, has an interpretation that doesn't make sense either. Like Winfield's position is, absolute knowledge is just the knowledge that consciousness doesn't work. That's it. It's just a negative knowledge. There's nothing positive about it beyond the knowledge that consciousness does not work. Well, if you read the chapter, you can't come to that conclusion, because the chapter says a lot more than that. Hegel explicitly says here, and he says in that chapter, that we have, before the science of logic, we have a science, a complete, valid, sound science. Not a hypothetical science, not a maybe, not a we'll find out it's science later kind of science. He says we have science now. We have achieved science. That the structure of the phenomenology as the whole circuit, this constitutes 100% positive science about phenomenology itself. So we have arrived at the general structure of knowledge positively we know what it is. We don't. It's not just that we know what it isn't. We know what it is. We have arrived at the certainty that there is such a thing as the concept. We have arrived at the certainty that there is such a thing as the absolute. We have arrived at the certainty that this is thought itself, that it's beyond consciousness. The only thing we lack is that on that level, all that we can say is there is such a thing, but we don't have any internal content yet as to what it is on its own right. But beyond that, we do have a concept, when we do have a recognition that there is the concept, and we have quite a bit to say about the concept concerning its structures. Like Hegel constantly goes on and gives full recapitulations of what the methodology of the concept is. He talks about it in forms of immediacy and mediation. He talks about it in forms of like content and form itself. He talks about it as essence and appearances. He talks about it as immediacy, mediation, self-mediation. He talks about it as subject, object, absolute, substance, substance, form, absolute. He talks it in so many ways, and all of them, at the end of the phenomenology, positively to be true. Like these aren't. There isn't such a thing as like, well, we just don't know. We just begin with nothing. You do know something. Like very much, you do know something. That is very clear. So like, people like Winfield are just wrong about this. Breeze talk. Where should I read to learn definitions of the words as I know them? You read Hegel. I've looked at some Hegel dictionaries. Honestly, I don't find them very helpful. I looked at Inwood's dictionary. I think that these are just a lot of yapping and just like basically hardly anything better than what Hegel does. I think the Bagui has a also Hegel dictionary, and I looked at it and I didn't think it was very good either. I have a glossary on my Empyrean Trail. Let me link that to you. So here in the side chat, there you go. That's a glossary of where I'm building up certain definitions, and in the introduction, Hegel mentioned this. He mentioned that one of the things that people should have is, if they don't know how to think speculatively yet, nonetheless, they can learn how to distinguish things and get into abstraction. And that's what I try to focus on with my definitions. I try to just show you the structure in a kind of the most intuitive way that I'm able to, with common terms, common words, common phrasing. Some of these are not so common, so I mean, you're limited. But a lot of these things can be explained in a more common way. And that's good enough for grasping what Hegel is onto most of the time. Somebody should get on that one day. Somebody should make an actual Hegel dictionary, because the current dictionaries suck. They're not actually dictionaries at all. They're more like mini encyclopedias in which they try to explain to you these concepts. But you don't need a little essay explaining to you what the concept does or whatever. What you need is somebody just clearly state what is the structure of the concept. Just literally give you the definition. Give you the bounds. It applies here in this kind of general form. So anyways, so yeah. So we have a science of consciousness, we have a disposition. Consciousness has the concept of science. So there you go, this whole idea, well, we just end up with radical, negation. No, that's not true. I mean, obviously there's a determinate, Winfield doesn't say like, oh, we just end up with nothing. He says it's a determinate negation, but it's a determinate negation against this other stuff doesn't work, and that's it. But that's not true. We have a positive concept of science, we have a positive concept of pure knowledge, and this is a result. We have it. We don't have to go to the science of logic to get it. We have it there. We just don't have it in its pure form conceptually, but we do have a genuine, valid, sound concept of it. To this extent, logic has for its presupposition the science of spirit in its appearance. That would be in Its appearance is phenomenology. So science of spirit in its phenomenology, is science which contains necessity and therefore demonstrates the truth of the standpoint which is pure knowledge and of its mediation. So, for anybody who doesn't buy into whatever Hegel's doing here, they still believe in representations. Well, you got to go read the phenomenology of spirit to get yourself purged of that. But good luck with that, honestly, because my experience is that doesn't work. You have to be some. I don't know how smart or intelligent you have to be to understand what the hell's going on in the phenomenology, but you got to be beyond anybody who I've ever met. You got to be beyond me. You got to be probably beyond a fucking Chad like Schelling or something, because people didn't understand that book back then. People don't understand that book now. I don't know of anybody who's just read that book and understood it. Seems extremely, extremely unlikely. Antonio Limonero asks about the positive content. Do you mean, for instance, that the movement of sense-certainty we witness is a positive content? Yeah, the movement of sense-certainty is a positive content, but even if you ignore those things and you say, well, these are just phenomenal appearances, the general structure of that is itself 100% a concept, conceptually. It's not just a phenomenal appearance like it is for sense-certainty. It is itself a pure concept. So the concept of consciousness is itself a pure concept. The concept of science is itself a pure concept. There is no doubt about that at the end of the phenomenology. So in this science of spirit, in its appearance, the beginning is made from empirical sensuous consciousness, and it is this consciousness which is immediate knowledge in the strict sense. So in the strict sense of immediate knowledge, insofar as knowledge is consciousness, con with scientia, knowledge. So consciousness is just a structure of being with knowledge, having an object to know that you know. So the immediacy of that, strictly speaking, is actually consciousness. Not self-conscious, sense certainty, the immediate consciousness of the senses. But there in this science is where its nature is discussed. Any other consciousness, such as faith in divine truths, inner experience, knowledge through inner revelation, etc., proves upon cursory reflection to be very, very ill-suited as an instance of immediate knowledge. So with phenomenology, the same thing that's going on in the science of logic is really going on. There is no difference in methodology at all. Zero, none. You read what he says in the introduction about what the structure of the method is, and then you read, say, the Absolute Idea chapter in the Science of Logic, which is the chapter on methodology. Basically the same shit, just different names. One is about consciousness, one's about cognition. Same stuff, same structure. So you're always beginning with the immediate. You're always, and in the phenomenology, this is done as a matter of kind of what seems to be convenient, but it's also done as a matter of rationally speaking, which is going to actually be which one makes more sense, to begin with complicated stuff or begin with simple stuff and slowly build up to complicated stuff. Obviously, simple stuff is going to be pragmatically and also just rationally easier, So stuff like inner experiences, inner revelation, blah, blah, all these are mediated. They're not immediate at all. Even sense certainty is ultimately not immediate, and that's the problem why we move on, because the thing that's supposed to be immediate is not in fact mediated, and we're just kind of going back down to what is supposed to be mediating this, which also looks like a complexification, a complication. So in the said treatise, immediate consciousness is also that which in the science comes first and immediately, and is therefore a presupposition. So it's a presupposition in that, at least in the phenomenology and in this, we can't at the outset say that we ought to begin with the immediate. We're just kind of assuming it. It's a pragmatic kind of thing. Some parts of reason negatively tell us that that's where you begin, but you can't really prove it at the beginning because, well, it's a beginning. You're not supposed to be able to prove a beginning, because if it's a beginning, then it's not going to have anything prior to it to condition it. So, anyways, continue 94. Logic is the pure science, that is, pure knowledge in the full compass of its development. But in that result, the idea has the determination of a certainty that has become truth. It is a certainty which, on the one hand, no longer stands over and against a subject matter confronting it externally, but has interiorized it, is knowingly aware that the subject matter is itself, and, on the other hand, has relinquished any knowledge of itself that would oppose it to objectivity, and would reduce the latter to a nothing. It has externalized this subjectivity and is at one with its externalization. Let me reread that. Logic is... Sorry that I reread things like twice. Like, once I'm reading it just for like the sake of hearing it out, but I can't think very well in the flow of reading. I can either focus on diction or cognition, but I can't think and read fluently at the same time. So that's why I end up rereading stuff. But in that result, so logic is a pure science, that is, pure knowledge in the full compass of its development. So at the end of the phenomenology, we end up with the result of the immediacy of thought. But this thought is just an in itself at that point. We haven't developed thought as such. We've only arrived at thought as such. We've only arrived that there is the concept, that there is thought, that consciousness is really just essentially thought. But we haven't worked out in thought what thought is itself. So that's why logic is the pure science of this. But in that result, the idea has the determination of a certainty that has become truth. This phrasing Hegel likes a lot, certainty and truth. And in a way, it's very intuitive. I think you kind of hear that and you get the gist of what it is correctly. But he never goes out and defines this, like certainty particularly. Truth he does define, but certainty not really. And just use it colloquially, but at the same time he's also using it very technically. So certainty is the accordance of knowledge with the known to consciousness. So certainty is also just like the truth of consciousness itself. That I am certain of something to the I am certain of something to the extent that I know that's something, right? Or to the extent that I believe I know that's something. My certainty may be wrong, because my belief may be wrong. I may believe, something is, say, like an edible berry, but actually, the reality is some poisonous berry that looks just like the edible berry. I believe that I'm certain. I have my knowledge of what that berry that's edible is. I look at it like, well, it looks like it matches. It's corresponding. I can be certain. But, the reality says otherwise. So certainty and truth can be off in that way, so long as the certainty belongs only to the representation of knowledge. Obviously, you're going to have a mismatch between truth and certainty. But once certainty is the certainty of thought, there can be no mismatch between certainty and truth. Certainty and truth just end up being the same thing. Knowledge and known end up being the exact same thing. So there can be no chance of failure. All knowledge is certain knowledge. All certain knowledge is truth. 100%. So it is a certainty which, on the one hand, no longer stands over against a subject matter confronting it externally, but has interiorized it, so it's not a representation, is knowingly aware that the subject matter is itself, so there's no gap between knowing and known, knower and known, and on the other hand, has relinquished any knowledge of itself that would oppose it to objectivity and would reduce the latter to a nothing. So this would be like the purely epistemic position, like a Kantian position, where actually, the things of knowledge are ultimately just the positing of my mind, or the Fichtean position. Everything out there is just a projection of my mind, and there really aren't these forms. There really aren't things out there. At most, like the world is in itself, and I don't know what that is. It's beyond me. It has exteriorized this subjectivity and is at one with its externalization. Pretty clear. 95. Now, starting with this determination of pure knowledge, all that we have to do to ensure that the beginning will remain immanent to the science of this knowledge is to consider, or rather, setting aside every reflection, simply to take up what is there before us. So, Hegel's a simple guy. Hegelian philosophy is pretty simple. Like everybody goes like, oh, but you have to presuppose so much, and there's a whole metaphysics and whatnot, and sorry for that. What was I saying? You got to presuppose so much, and you got to have these complex metaphysical things in the background. And oh my god, let me shut my door for a second. Anyways, all I'm saying is it ain't complicated, and that paragraph is pretty true what Hegel does. Hegelianism is just kind of like, just observe, watch what's there, and just follow it along. It's that easy. It's science. It's science. It's simple. It's not that complicated, man. Just watch things, right? The same way that people learn about dogs by just watching dogs and, like kind of just observing things and noting them down. It's like, okay, it does this at this one time. It's this and that one that time. Same thing, you got a concept and well, hey, at this moment the concept looks this way, at another moment it looks that way, and what do you know? That's just what it is. It's that simple, it's that easy. Just be empirical, man. So let me read that. So now starting with this determination of pure knowledge, all that we have to do to ensure that the beginning will remain immanent to the science of this knowledge is to consider, or rather, setting aside every reflection, simply to take up what is there before us. So just get rid of your, what does Hegel call them? He has a specific phrase he uses for, like your own special thoughts. Forget about yourself. Forget about what you think or forget about what you think dogs are. This is a very pertinent thing we say about stereotypes, right? Forget about what you think about, say, Chinese people or the Chinese government or China. Forget about it. You want to learn what China is like, what Chinese people are like? Go to China and just interact with them. Forget about what you believe they're like. Just let them interact with you naturally as they are out in the wilds of China. And you'll find out who they really are, as opposed to what you have been taught to believe that they are, as opposed to the falsifications and, delusions that you have accepted that they are. The same thing with thoughts. The same thing with all things in philosophy. Forget about what you have been, what is it called? Habituated to think about certain things. Fight your habits, fight your instincts to try to project constantly on things and just let them show themselves to you. Sorry if I not that. Let things show themselves to you. Just observe. Be a scientist. Watch what thinking does. Don't assume what thinking does. And then you will have zero problems. Zero. Everything will be easy peasy. That's difficulty number one. That's the hardest thing when people read Hegel and really any good philosopher, that people cannot let go of what they believe they know. And even if you tell them, look, I've had videos. Yesterday I had an interaction with somebody on the live. It wasn't on the live stream, I think. But it was before. And this guy, he asked me, what I thought about certain things that I showed him my God argument. And every time he had a rebuttal, it was, well, to me, this word means this. And I said, okay, but you asked me. You're talking about what I think, not what about you think. I didn't ask you what you think. I didn't ask you what you think being is. I don't care. But you asked me what I think being is. You asked me what I think the universe is. And I'm telling you. And his response was always, well, that can't be it, because according to me, it's this. But we're not talking about you. We're not talking about what you think. Just because you call the same thing by the same, you call something by the same name doesn't mean we're talking about the same thing at all. Like, people just get caught up in all these things. They just can't let go of these behavioral associations that they have. It's the worst thing. If you can't do that, then you can't do philosophy. Not only can you not do philosophy, you can't genuinely talk to other people. You can't come to an agreement and understanding of other people, because it is the ultimate uncharity. It's the ultimate closedness of the self, that you really aren't willing to look at other people's perspectives. Now, it's like I said, like, I'm kind of an ass because by and large, I don't care about people's perspectives, but that's also why I don't ask them. I don't ask people most of the time, hey, what do you think? I don't care. I'm not interested. But if they ask me, I'm going to talk about my perspective. I'm going to push my perspective, and I'm going to stop them from talking from their perspective against my perspective, because we're talking about my perspective. That was the question. It's the thing in question, right? So I don't care what it is that they think about some other thing, because we're talking about my thing. Now, maybe they go like, well, the thing that you're talking about, I call by some other thing. Okay, that's fine. But at least we're talking about the thing, But if we're not talking about the same thing, then it's hopeless. Totally the worst thing. So both as a communicative, ethical issue, as well as a normative, rational issue, you ought to always just kind of put your preconceptions aside. Don't accept the stereotypes of anything, be it people or be it things, be it even abstractions. It just ruins everything. So 96, pure knowledge, thus withdrawn into this unity, has upheaved here is aufheben, otherwise normally called sublation, every relation to another into mediation. It is without distinctions, and as thus distinctionless, it ceases to be knowledge. What we have before us is only simple immediacy. So once you get to the phenomenology spirit's end, we have pure knowledge, and the focus then is not about knowledge anymore, because we've collapsed consciousness. We're stepping away from the standpoint of consciousness now, which is this oppositional standpoint of a knower and a known. But once we get beyond that, and we just have, the immediacy of knowing without a what to the knowing, without the content of consciousness anymore, there's no point in calling this knowledge. It's just simple immediacy. It just is. And then this whole mediation is kind of forgotten. Well, it's kind of forgotten in the sense that, like, we're no longer looking at it because it's not really relevant. All this stuff in consciousness is representational, but we're not dealing with representation anymore. There's no point in calling it up. So you deal with pure thought as thought, and you should be good. We get an hour. We can go for more. 97. Let me see how long this is. 97. 122. Yeah, we can go through most of it. 88, 97. Well, we can at least maybe get about 2/3. So 97. Simple immediacy is itself an expression of reflection. Reflection here being thinking about something. Reflection is also mediation, like a division. You have a split. You have one side, you have the other side on the split. And on the metaphysical level, they're literally just mirrors, therefore reflections. It refers to the distinction from what is mediated. So immediacy is reflected against mediation. The true expression of this simple immediacy is therefore pure being. Just as pure knowledge should mean nothing but knowledge as such, so also pure being should mean nothing but being in general, being and nothing else, without further determination and filling. So, we have simple immediacy. We can't call it knowledge anymore because there's no structure of consciousness. We can't call it immediacy because, immediacy in the name is not mediated, and that's already reflected, but that's not immediate, that's mediated. So we want a name that fits the immediacy. And what's the most immediate name? Being, isness. I am, you are, the dog is, the moon is, space is. An idea is, a probability is, everything is. And, can you get below the is and say what it is without just appealing back to the is? And the answer is, well, no. For anything that is, it is. If you say, well, actually, I actually had this discussion with the person who I was reading this with a couple of weeks ago, and we got stuck up on all this. And when she's like, well, being belongs to, like the present order of like created things. And I'm okay, so what do you say about like potentials and possibilities? Well, they are. I'm like, hold up. Did you just say they are? So did you just qualify them with being? And it's like, well, it's a matter of speaking. And I'm like, no, it's not really a matter of speaking. It's not just like, oh, well, my phrasing is bad. There's a reason that like we speak about it this way. It is the most general thing about anything, being, and it's so general that you can even say it about non-beings. Things that don't exist, things that aren't present, things that are not there. Mainly because even what is not there is, because being itself is. If you read the first chapter, the first paragraph, 4 lines or something like that, it's like being is not. 98. Being is what makes the beginning here. It is presented indeed as originating through mediation, but a mediation which at the same time upheaves itself, and the presupposition is of a pure knowledge, which is the result of finite knowledge of consciousness. So there is a mediation. We know we got through a process of abstraction, and he'll mention it in chapter 1 as well. And he says, like, look, yes, there's mediation, but the mediation doesn't, from this side of the mediation, we don't have to even recall that there's a mediation. The mediation will do nothing because we're just dealing with the purely immediate as immediate. So, it's upheaved, it's overturned, it's gone away with, it's canceled for a while. Eventually it's brought back, but, we don't have to remember it. It's a self-canceling thing. It's just like how with contingency, the contingency upheaves itself, cancels itself by collapsing into the necessary, because by its very definition, it's supported only by the necessary. It has no being of its own. Let me read this. So being is what makes the beginning here. It is presented indeed as originating through mediation, but a mediation which at the same time upheaves itself, and the presupposition is of a pure knowledge, which is the result of finite knowledge of consciousness. So finite knowledge of consciousness. So, we ended with absolute knowing in the phenomenology. So, absolute, that can't be finite. It's in the name, absolute. The absolute is infinite, can't be finite. But if no presupposition is to be made, if the beginning is itself to be taken immediately, then the only determination of this beginning is that it is to be the beginning of logic, of thought as such. There is only present the resolve, which can also be viewed as arbitrary, of considering thinking as such. So if you haven't read the phenomenology, don't worry about it. All you really need is just to make the absolute abstraction of just getting rid of the mediation. Whether you're convinced about this is a different issue. Convincing is a psychological thing. You may or may not be convinced. Maybe you need the phenomenology spirit to convince you. But, if you can just put that aside, then you can just put all details aside and just begin immediately. And, there's nothing special about this. Just begin. That's it. He said, just have the resolve to think as such, to just begin. Just do it. And that's all that's needed. $99. The beginning must then be absolute, or what means the same here, must be an abstract beginning. So abstraction and absolute here are being identified. That ought to strike you as weird. Think about it, okay? So Hegel talks down about abstraction so much. Why is he identifying the absolute with abstraction here? Well, it's pretty simple. So abstraction is to take apart from the context of its whole. to consider it without its context. All abstractions of a finite kind are false because they do have a context. The absolute, however, is the only truly abstract thing because it's the only thing that can be taken apart from all things because there are no other things to it. So it's the only thing you can consider entirely independently on its own, internally to itself. Nothing else really has this quality. So the only true abstraction is the absolute. But what do you know? That looks exactly like total concretion because the absolute is everything. So, in the only true abstraction, the absolute abstraction, you also have absolute concretion because absolute abstraction is abstraction from abstraction. The abstraction of abstraction, and therefore, think about it this way. You have a blob of reality here, and then you abstract. But in abstracting this, you abstracted this. And what do you know? It's the infinity symbol, It's the magical number 8. And that is concretion, because now you got two determinate sides which give you detail, which is exactly the opposite of abstraction. Abstraction is supposed to be taking away detail, the way people normally think. But if you have absolute abstraction, you've got absolute detail. You've got concretion. So there is nothing that it may presuppose, must not be mediated by anything or have a ground, ought to be rather itself the ground of the entire science. It must therefore be simply an immediacy, or rather only immediacy itself. Just as it cannot have any determination with respect to an other, so too it cannot have any within. It cannot have any content, for any content would entail distinction and the relation of distinct moments to each other, and hence a mediation. The beginning is therefore pure being. Pretty self-explanatory, quite frankly. If the beginning is the beginning of all things, then it's the ground of all things. It's the thing from which the seed sprouts. So ought to rather itself be the ground of the entire science. It's the foundation. It must therefore be simply an immediacy, or rather only immediacy. So this phrasing, we think like, well, it has to be an immediacy. No, because that would be a beginning. But we're not talking about a beginning. We're talking about the beginning. So it can't be an immediacy. It must be the immediacy, immediacy itself. Just as it cannot have any determination with respect to another. And this is obvious, right? If something is immediate, it has no relationships. It's not mediated. A relationship is a mediation, a distinction, which is relating something, you have this thing here and that thing over there. The very difference separates but also unifies. It mediates them at a higher level. So you can't have any distinctions. You can't have any details. You can't have any relations at all. You can't have self-relations. You can't have other relations. You can't have relations, period. Can't have them. So it cannot have any content. For any content would entail distinction and the relation of distinct moments to each other, and hence mediation. The beginning is therefore pure being. And, as early as Parmenides, this was already known. Parmenides already established that in being, everything is. But that everything basically is no thing, because there aren't multiple things. Parmenides is a monist. There's only being. There's only the is. Insofar as anything is, it all is. This is, that is, the relationship is, the distinction is. Where is the actual difference? Because it all is. It's one smooth is throughout the whole thing. Where is the difference? There can't be. There isn't. On the level of being, everything is the same. (100) After this simple exposition of what alone first belongs to this simplest of all simples, the logical beginning, we may add the following further reflections, which should not serve, however, as elucidation and confirmation of the exposition. This is complete by itself, but are rather occasioned by notions and reflections which may come our way beforehand, and yet, like all other prejudices that antedate the science of logic, must be disposed of within the science itself, and are therefore to be patiently deferred until then. So, I mean, he's going to give some reflections, some thoughts about stuff regarding this, but, don't take this as like the definitive argument or the definitive proof about what he's saying, because the definitive proof belongs to the actual science of logic itself, which we haven't started. Nonetheless, they make sense. They are ways in which a lot of people go like, that makes sense, Hegel. Good argument. And, Hegel sounds like him, good for you, but it's not a good argument for me. So 101, the insight that absolute truth must be a result, and conversely that a result presupposes a first truth, which, because it is first, objectively considered is not necessary, and from the subjective side is not known. This insight has recently given rise to the thought that philosophy can begin only with something which is hypothetically and problematically true, and that at first, therefore, philosophizing can be only a quest. This is a view that Reinhold has repeatedly urged in the later stages of his philosophizing, and which must be given credit for being motivated by a genuine interest in the speculative nature of philosophical beginning. A critical examination of this view will also be an occasion for introducing a preliminary understanding of what progression in logic generally means, for the view has direct implications for the nature of this advance. Indeed, as portrayed by it, progression in philosophy would be rather a retrogression and a grounding, only by virtue of which it then follows as result that with which the beginning was made was not just an arbitrary assumption, but was in fact the truth, and the first truth at that. So this is very interesting. So let me read that whole paragraph. The insight that absolute truth must be a result, and conversely that a result presupposes a first truth, which, because it is first, objectively considered is not necessary, and from the subjective side is not known. So even though the phenomenology spirit does provide a kind of proof for this, it's not the absolute proof of it. But even if you don't have that proof, you don't need it. Because guess what? We're starting with the beginning. We're not starting with a beginning. We're starting with the beginning. And the whole meaning of the beginning is that this is where you begin. If this is where you begin, how the hell are you going to have some prior reasoning about it? Because this is where we begin. This is where everything begins. It's not like, well, this is where I begin. Well, this is where philosophy begins. This is where thinking as such begins, period. So, it doesn't matter. We don't need the proof that truth is a result. We don't need to know that truth is a result. We're going to find out. On the subjective side, we don't know it because we haven't started. We're just beginning. And, objectively, we don't need it either because we're beginning. This insight has recently given rise to the thought that philosophy can begin only with something which is hypothetically and problematically true, and that at first, therefore, philosophizing can be only a quest. I will admit, for a few years, I kind of thought about the logic this way, mainly because I was swayed a little bit by Dr. Daniel Pascal Zorn's thoughts on this, in which his view is that like the general form of the concept is right, but all this other stuff about being and all these categories, they're just kind of contingent to like however you may be able to like organize yourself in a system of categories. That all that Hegel really discovered, in his view, is the necessary structure and form of the self-organization of concepts. But that it doesn't seem to me that Dr. Zorn takes this to be something that has a definitive content of its own as such. And so based on that, you would have to conclude then that at the beginning with being, it's just a hypothetical beginning. If it ends up being that being shows itself to engage the whole circuit of the absolute, then we conclude that being was the beginning. But at the beginning, we don't know that, so it's only hypothetical. And Hegel's explicitly saying here, no, we're not making a hypothetical beginning. When we make the beginning, we actually do know that it is the beginning. But what we don't know is that it is beginning as beginning. Because the whole category of beginning presupposes that you know that it has an end and that it goes to a certain place, which we don't know. Nonetheless, we can know that this is the beginning, insofar as this is going to be the beginning of cognition. This is all things begin in immediacy. Reinhold is not well known. I consider Reinhold, according to what's his, I think is it Paul W. Frank's the guy who wrote what is it? That book on skepticism and transcendental. All or Nothing, Skepticism, Transcendental Idealism, and something German idealism. In that book, he holds Reinhold to be the real first German idealist, because he's the one who first gets rid of the whole thing in itself and says, we got to start all things from one principle, and it's all got to be inherent to this principle to build out of. And then, this is where Fichte builds off of in some ways, and Schelling builds off of, and this kind of kickstarts the whole German idealist project. Also, I think Reinhold is the weird guy who, for a while, kind of treated Kant as the second coming of Jesus. And, he thought that the critical philosophy was the culmination, fulfillment of Christianity, finally brought to full philosophical conscientiousness of reason. I like Kant, man. Not enough to replace Jesus with Kant. Some people are odd. Some people just the drive, the temptation for idolatry in human beings is somewhat astounding sometimes. So critical examination of this view will also be occasion for introducing preliminary blah blah blah. Something about progression philosophy. Okay. Indeed, as portrayed by it, progression in philosophy would be rather a retrogression and a grounding only by virtue of which it then follows as a result that with which the beginning was made was not just an arbitrary assumption, but was in fact the truth, and the first truth at that. One of the weird things, and this is you'll find it in some of the more some of the well-known stuff. I don't know that they really comment too much on this. I just figured this out on my own. Maybe I heard it from somebody else, but if I did, I have no idea who it would be, because I can't remember anything in Winfield that mentions this. I can't remember anything in anyone who I mentioned this. Maybe I first heard it from Jay Bernstein. That guy talks a lot of things, connects a lot of things. But also, since I forgot who the hell I got it from, I think it's just I might have heard that early on and just kind of forgotten about it. And then once I saw it for myself, I'm like, oh yeah, this is happening. Which is, you start with being, you have nothing, you have becoming, you have presence, reality, negation, something. And it seems you're going brick by brick, building up, and you're constructing upwards. And it looks that way. And yet you can also look at it in the inverse and you go wait a minute, this structure was always already there. So you're really just digging down. That's all that's happening. So a transcendental synthesis, what is it? Kant phrases this, what is it called? A progressive synthesis is actually transcendental deduction, which is a backwards, deduction into the ground. It's very neat once you see it. So a construction is also just a backwards deduction. It's the same thing. It's like you're going around a circle, and as you're going farther away, at the same time you're getting closer. Same thing. Just different perspective of the same thing. So only by virtue of which it then follows as a result that with which the beginning was made, it was not just an arbitrary assumption, but was in fact the truth and the first truth. Let me read that prior sentence. A critical examination of this view would also be an occasion for introducing a preliminary understanding of what progression in logic generally means, for the view has a direct implication on the nature of this advance. So this thing about having the conclusion to prove that it's the truth, yes, only in the conclusion would you know it's the truth, but at the same time, there's an element of the truth already explicitly with you at the beginning, so you don't have to wait until the very end to get it. He also comments about this in the Phenomenology Spirit preface, where he says, well, this whole thing about the absolute, it's kind of like ridiculous that people assume like the absolute's somewhere over there and we're over here and we're just trying to get there, man. No, like, it's a ruse. Either you had the absolute with you all along, or you never had it and you're never going to get it. (102) It must be admitted that it is an essential consideration, one which will be found elaborated again within logic itself, that progression is a retreat to the ground, to the origin, and the truth on which that with which the beginning was made, and from which it is in fact produced, depends. By the way, this is part of why I like upheaval for Aufheben. You begin with the ground, and what do? You upheave the ground, you break it apart. You reveal that in being there's nothing, and that in nothing there is being. You're like, wait a minute, these are two sides of the same thing. There's a fissure in the ground, metaphorically speaking, but that fissure is becoming. That middle point is a cleavage, it's a fissure, it's a negative unity. And, what do you see in the fissure? Well, it's what is in the ground that has been heaved up. It's been brought up. It's been revealed. It's been, in Revelation, Apocalypse, when you break the ground, the whole thing shakes and shatters. And what is hidden is brought to light. What is in the ground is upheaved, brought out, made explicit and present to you. And in being brought up, guess what? It's being uplifted. It's being upheld. And it's being uptaken. And a lot of beautiful wordplay right there. It's just something. I love that word. I'm never going back. Never going back to sublation. Nobody can ever convince me otherwise. So this consciousness on its forward path from the immediacy with which it began is led back to the absolute knowledge, which is its innermost truth. This truth, the ground, is then also that from which the original first proceeds, the same first, which at the beginning came on the scene as something immediate. It is most of all in this way that absolute spirit, which is revealed as the concrete and supreme truth of all being, comes to be known, as at the end of the development it freely externalizes itself, letting itself go into the shape of an immediate being, resolving itself into the creation of a world which contains all that fell within the development preceding that result, in which, through this reversal of position with its beginning, is converted into something dependent on the result as principle. Essential to science is not so much that a pure immediacy should be the beginning, but that the whole of science is in itself a circle in which the first becomes also the last, and the last also the first. If you know your Bible, if you know your Christian sayings, God says, and Jesus says, I am the first and the last, I am the Alpha and the Omega. And there's many things that Jesus says regarding that. He says, the first shall be last, the first saved will also be the last, to enter heaven. And there's many meanings to that, which are fantastic, very speculative as well, just like, ethically, morally beautiful. Aesthetically beautiful as well. So let's see. Let me read that real quick. This truth, the ground, is then also from that the original proceeds. The same first at the beginning came on the scene as something immediate. So you start with the immediate, you go through mediations, you come back, and you connect the immediate to the immediate. And hey, what do you know? Like meets like, and if the separation between myself and myself is just myself, because I am the activity of the separation itself, is there actually a mediation? Is there anything between me and me in the end? The answer is no. There's just me. There's me here, and there's me here separating me. It's all me, me, me. It's me, myself, and I. It's all immediate, purely immediate. And that's how you get back to the beginning. So it is most of all in this way that absolute spirit, which is revealed as the concrete and supreme truth of all being, comes to be known, as at the end of the development it freely externalizes itself, letting itself go into the shape of an immediate being. So, you go through this whole process of concretion and mediation, and it looks so complicated, then you close off the circle, bam, And you just have one solid immediacy. But the moment it closes, you have this boundary in which its closure is the opening of everything else. So the moment anything is fully determinate, it opens up a new dimensionality, to reality, to the absolute. So, in the moment that God is complete, God creates, because God witnesses themselves, looks upon himself as a finite other, as nature, as creation. By the way, interesting enough, the very last paragraph of the Phenomenology of Spirit, actually, the last two paragraphs, recapitulate almost verbatim the very last paragraph of the Science of Logic, that the transition of nature is literally said verbatim in the Phenomenology, both in regards to nature and in regard to consciousness. Brahmin, yes. Quote, learn up the germs of the transcendental terms, Robert Wolff. Is that Robert Paul Wolff? Well, no, Robert Paul Wolff doesn't like Hegel. He's a Kantian Marxist. Can't be him. That's a nice little phrase. Learn up the germs, and yeah, like the terms are just germs. They're generative terms. So let's see. So you have the transition nature, basically. People treat this as very weird. The very end of the logic, people are like, what does this mean? The transition of nature is so mysterious. It releases itself freely. What does it mean? What does it mean? Who knows? It's pretty straightforward. Thus, if you understand being, nothing becoming, you understand what the hell happens at the end. Nothing different. Absolutely the exact same thing. Just as the end of the Phenomenology, same thing. If you got one basic movement, you got all the movements. They all end up being in the closure, which is an immediate being, which also then opens up the determinacy of the other thing. So resolving itself into the creation of a world which contains all that fell within development preceding that result, which through this reversal of position with its beginning is converted into something dependent on the result as principle. So, at the end of the Phenomenology, Hegel talks about how science returns to consciousness. Science is pure thought, consciousness is representation. And he says the moment science closes, there is now science here. I am scientific consciousness. And there is what? There is the immediacy, which as in the mode of consciousness, returning to this opposition in the mode of otherness, is the object that is immediately before me, and that is just sense certainty once more. So the closure of science is the opening up of representation if you focus on the moment of its otherness. If you focus on the moment of its identity, then you have science, pure science, which is logic. And that's so you have a circle and another circle, and there's really three circles. You have one circle here and another circle here. And if you go from here and you focus on the negative side, you go right back. If you go to here and you focus on the positive side, you go to this new position. I don't know if that makes any sense. I mean, that's how I visualize it to myself. It's kind of diagrammatic, but sometimes that stuff doesn't help anybody. So, another thing about that is, okay, so you have the closure of one moment of science, one system of science. This then becomes an immediate in another circuit of science, another mode of being. But what's in this, what's in the thing that you finished, now is in itself for other things. And it will appear in those other things in a new way. But everything that's here is going to sprout, it's going to grow within that new system in its own new fashion. Which is why the order of the categories of the phenomenology and the order of the categories of philosophy of nature and the order of categories in philosophy of spirit, they're all different. All the categories in the science of logic are in play within all of those, but they manifest differently according to a different relationship of order. That's why, in phenomenology, you can go from like infinity as a abstract category to self-consciousness as a concrete mode of, being. It just works that way. It makes sense once you understand the structural like way that it moves. So letting itself go into shape of immediate being, blah, blah, blah. Through this reversal position with its beginning, converted to something. So essential to science, let me read that. So resolving itself into the creation of a world which contains all that fell within the development preceding that results, so everything that's in it, through this reversal position with its beginning, is converted into something dependent on the result as principle. So insofar as you have a beginning, insofar as you have the completion of this ultimately is only complete because of the result. So what seemed to be the principle which everything rested on, the ground, ends up being grounded by what it's supposed to ground, which is itself a movement to logic. The principle is itself the conclusion, not a principle at all. The conclusion is really the principle. But then, you just kind of collapse the difference, and principle and conclusion are the same thing. Alpha and omega, same thing. Essential to science is not so much that a pure immediacy should be the beginning, but that the whole of science is in itself a circle in which the first becomes also the last also the first. So this is key. We don't need to start immediately to do science. You don't need to read the science of logic to do science. You don't need to do much of jack shit to do science. You can start anywhere. All of it really relies upon methodology, ultimately. If you could do methodology perfectly well, and if you could like sift out things perfectly well and clearly, you could start anywhere. The problem is that on a practical level, you can't. On a practical level, the world's a mess. It's not clear what is and isn't a thing. It's not clear what is and isn't a proper category of an object. So the safest thing to do to not waste your time is to just start with the science of logic. Make sure that your concepts of concepts are set straight, and then go and do everything else. Because at least if your concept of concept is set straight, you will not be confused. There will be plenty of things that people will say, hey, here's an object. Hey, there's an object. And you'll say, nah, I can tell that one's bullshit. Nah, I can tell that one's bullshit. And somebody says, hey, there's another one. You're like, yeah, that one's got some merit. I see something true in that one. Let's investigate that. Because otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. This is a problem with every other kind of philosophizing. Everybody's claiming like, look, I got this thing. I made up, you can be like Stephen Wolfram. I made up the Ruliad. I've concocted this concept. And you can just like take a quick look at it and go like, no, you got something like partially true there. But like most of this is just garbage. It's just kind of hodgepodge of stuff. And you can also see that a lot of people are cooking up great things, but it's all the same dish, just slightly variated, a different name. Just go into the science of logic and clarifying what the hell reason is for yourself, like clarifying what all these categories do and how you actually think and the structures of thinking, makes it so much easier to think about everything else. Makes you just much more capable of thinking for yourself, as well as just like noticing all the bullshit that people put out there, because our world is full of bullshit, and the people who you would think would know how to like not create bullshit are some of the biggest bullshitters in the world. It's hard to say, scientists are a big bullshitting group. People go like, oh, social sciences and soft sciences, yeah, that's all bullshit, like, what is it, the whole like social Marxism or what I forget what the hell they call it, but yeah, there's a lot of bullshit there, but there's a lot of bullshit in the hard sciences as well, especially physics. You all should know, like if you don't know, I have a huge bone to pick with physics. So anyways, get your concepts straight. You can begin anywhere, but just to save yourself time, just get your basic concepts of concepts straight. You'll be good otherwise. And by that I mean you don't actually have to read the entire Science of Logic, by the way. Yeah, cultural Marxism. Thank you. Yeah, I rarely hear that stuff these days because I don't listen to politics very much. Mostly geopolitics, and mostly from people who don't really care about that stuff. So yeah, main thing is science is a circle. That's the main tell. It's not about you got to begin immediately. You got to begin immediately. It doesn't matter where you begin. Just do the thing right. Produce the right results. Science as a circle. 103. How much time we got left? Plenty of time left. Conversely, it follows that it is just as necessary to consider as result that into which the movement returns as to its ground. In this respect, the first is just as much the ground, and the last a derivative. Since the movement makes a start from the first, and by correct inferences arrives at the last as the ground, this last is result. Further, the advance from that which constitutes the beginning is to be considered only as one more determination of the same advance, so that this beginning remains as the underlying ground of all that follows without vanishing from it. The advance does not consist in the derivation of an other, or in the transition to a truly other. Inasmuch as there is a transition, it is equally upheaved again. Thus the beginning of philosophy is the ever-present and self-preserving foundation of all subsequent developments, remaining everywhere imminent in its further determinations. Excuse me. So, that was pretty self-explanatory. Just to point out, the last two paragraphs, what have they been? Hegel's telling you, he's giving you a description of method. This is what happens in the method. And this is indeed what happens in the method. But there's also the fact that people read this book, they read these prefaces and introductions, and they don't understand this just shows you how utterly worthless a description of method, no matter how detailed, no matter how everyday and simple it is, nobody gets it because the method is completely impenetrable, opaque, without having done it. Once you do it, all these descriptions, you're like, oh yeah, that is how it works. But before that, you're like, what the fuck are you talking about, Hegel? Give me a second. Sorry about that. Somebody had a knock on the door to give me freeze-dried Skittles. Wolfie. Oh, okay. Not gonna lie, I like that better than Skittles. Skittles are usually chewy, but this is kind of just like powdery like Skittles flavored stuff. Tastes more like Jolly Ranchers. I do like Jolly Ranchers. I might go get some later. Usually I'm just too lazy to go get anything, man. And I do thank God that he made me lazy in that regard. I'm too lazy to have addictions. Sometimes, I'm craving something, it's like a 5-minute walk, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. Even like a 30-second walk to my kitchen, I'm like, I could do the 30 seconds, go get the thing that I want, but that's just 30 seconds of walk, and I'm not doing that. So anyways, 103, self-explanatory. I could give you some explanation to it, but you know what? You can read the main text yourself. You'll see. It's kind of pointless to belabor the method before doing the method. I've had experiences over the last decade in which I've had many times where I try to explain this to people, and I've realized very clearly explain the method to them before just doing it is kind of worthless. So I ain't explaining it to you. 104. Bramilli asks, do you really think reading a few chapters of Science Logic helps with terminology? Absolutely. Give it a try yourself. You'll see. Read at least the first 2 chapters, the first 3 chapters if you can. I mean, I got my commentaries on them for whatever that's worth. Everybody who I've done that with has basically confirmed that, yeah, like it becomes so much more readable once you know how to think this stuff and you go back and you can follow along. So 104. In this advance, the beginning thus loses the one-sidedness that it has when determined simply as something immediate and abstract. It becomes mediated in the line of scientific forward movement, consequently turns into a circle. It also follows that what constitutes the beginning, because it is something still undeveloped and empty of content, it is not yet truly known at that beginning, and that only science, and science fully developed, is the completed cognition of it, replete with content and finally truly grounded. I don't know what to tell people on this, quite frankly, other than that Hegel's quite literal about this. You know, I'll show you right now. Let's see if I can get a life cycle diagram. Let's get a life cycle of a beaver. You know, beavers are cute. Beavers look cute, but you know, like the sounds they make they're just disturbingly, you know, like annoying. It's just like you would think that an animal like that just doesn't like make these like annoying high-pitched baby sounds, and I don't know, it's just off-putting. Oh, come on. Can't tell me nobody has a life cycle of beavers. Beavers not that popular. All right, we'll do dog. All right. Should be on the screen. I mean, you see that. You start with a puppy. It grows up. It grows. It matures. It becomes a dog. You know, you got 2 dogs. They do the deed. And what do you know? You got a puppy again. What's up with that? Why is that circular? You know, because like we're told all this time circularity is bad. You know, it's like, you know, it's bad reasoning. Well, why is reality circular? Like, especially biological reality is very circular. And it's the most obvious one. Because the beginning is the end. What is the whole point of having adult dogs? They make puppies. That's the whole point. You know, what is the point of them surviving? Just to make more puppies, endlessly, more and more puppies, to just increase the species ever more forever. And the puppy's whole purpose is to grow up the dogs to what? Do what? Make more puppies, to make more dogs, to just keep on living. It's a self-serving cycle. It just produces itself. It is its own purpose. It is its own end. Nothing outside of it is really mattering on that level of the process. So, like, the whole thing is a circle. Where were we at? So, consequently turns a circle, constitutes beginning. Where were we at? I forgot. Somebody remind me. I think I scrolled slightly up, and I forgot exactly where we are. Beginning arbitrary is temporary assumption. Something which seems arbitrary tends to present. Nah, we hadn't read that. Because absolute ground, the result finally emerges. Progression is cognition. In this advanced beginning, this loses one. Yeah, we're 104. Never mind. In this advanced beginning, this loses one-sidedness that it has determined simply as something immediate and abstract. It becomes mediated in the line of scientific forward movement, consequently turns into a circle. So, you know, all right. You see this with the dogs, and you say, like, oh, well, it's a dog. It's just a dog. It's just a singular dog. But then you look at the dog's life, and you realize, wait a minute, these singular dogs, they're coming together, they're doing the deed, and they're making more dogs. So these dogs don't just exist in and for themselves and in and of themselves more than anything. They exist to make more dogs. It seems that that's mainly what they do. You know, they do their doggy stuff, they do the deed, and they make more dogs constantly, forever. So the immediate becomes dirempted, mediated. You get one dog, you get two dogs, you get three dogs, four dogs, so on and so on. And that turns into a circle. It's just dogs, producing dogs, producing dogs. Why are there dogs? Because there were dogs before. Why will there be dogs in the future? Because there's dogs now. Why are dogs now? To make more dogs in the future, and because there were dogs in the past. It's just dogs making dogs because of dogs for dogs. It's all one thing. It also follows that what constitutes the beginning, because there's something still undeveloped and empty of content, is not yet truly known at the beginning, and that only science and science fully developed is the completed cognition of it, replete with content and finally truly grounded. So this matter of development, you go from the puppy, it grows up all to the mature dog. You can talk about a seed, which looks very different from a complete plant. At least a puppy still looks like a dog, right? A seed doesn't look like the full-grown plant. It doesn't look like the fruit either. And yet in the seed, it transforms. It dies as a seed, rots, and then grows up into a plant. It germinates. It does all this other stuff, flowers, and finally finding fruits. And in the fruit, you have the seed. So you have this whole developmental path just to get back to where you began. Seeds, making seeds for seeds because of seeds. And that is the reality. And people might say, well, that's just the way of biology. Nothing else really does it. No, everything else does it too. You look at an atom. You look at an atom, right? If an atom does not recirculate its energy constantly, within itself, if that energy goes like whoosh, and it goes whoosh, if it just dissipates all of its energy, it can't keep that energy flowing in a circle within itself. That atom just radiates. It gets lost in radiation, decomposes and decays, and no atom anymore. So the atom is also a circular self-production. It's not a very active one. It's very passive. It's very minimal. It's not a conscious one. It's not living to that extent. But it is a circle. Everything in some way that is real has to be some kind of self-relating process which is constantly maintaining and generating itself as what it is. It's not complicated. If the universe was a power which is infinitely going out, with no return to itself in any way, there could be nothing at all. There wouldn't be a universe to begin with, because there would be no closure of anything. There would be no bound to anything. It would just be this pure force going where and forcing what? Nothing. There would be nothing to resist. There would be nothing to push. And there would be no push in reality. This force would be no force at all. It would be nothing. It would just be being. Something to keep in mind. (105) But for this reason, because it is as absolute ground that the result finally emerges, the progression of this cognition is not anything provisional, still problematic and hypothetical, but must be determined through the nature of the matter at issue and of the content itself. So, even if you don't accept that Hegel has the truth at the beginning, that this is the beginning, if you're open-minded, you can go ahead and just follow along with what he's doing, and you will see that once it goes in the conclusion back to the beginning, you can't escape that this is the beginning, that this is where, this is legitimately something true. This is where you can and should begin, and do begin. So even if you begin with the assumption that, well, this is maybe hypothetical, you can pretty much show it very succinctly and quickly that no, this is necessary. This is what it is. Because again, the dog example, you may say, well, maybe the puppy just hypothetically, it is a being that's just completely contingent. It goes nowhere. It might grow up into a dog, but there's no such thing as a dog species and blah blah blah. Well, just watch it go. And when it gets to the point in which you watch the dogs produce more puppies, then nope, a puppy is where a dog begins. No if, and, or buts. It just is. And by the way, See, Hegel's definitions give you such a way to say stuff that normally, one, people say a lot. People just say, well, it just is, man. It just is, okay? You know, just accept it. When they say it, it's bullshit. When I say it, when you, as a Hegel understander, say it, it's not bullshit. Because what we mean is this whole thing. What we mean is this whole cycle of the dog, you know, puppy becoming a dog, becoming a puppy, those things. This cycle, it's all the dog. In the puppy going through this whole mediation, it just returns back to itself. It creates the puppies categorically. You know, so the thing between the puppy here and the dog over here and back to the puppy, it's all the dog. It's all the same thing. So, and it's immediate. So the mediation is just the same thing. So it's, if what is between me, myself, and I is just myself, there's nothing between at all. So you're just immediate. And what is the name of immediacy? Being. It just is. So in saying it just is, I'm including this whole cycle of mediation because that just means immediacy as well. In fact, that's the concrete meaning of immediacy. So again, when other people say it's bullshit, when I say it, it makes sense. It's a fun little thing you can tell people. I don't think they'd probably find it funny, but I find it funny. Sorry if I'm blowing up the mic there a little bit, noticing that I'm spiking. So 108. Oh, no, we're 107. Wait, are we 107? Did I just skip down? Arbitrary assumption through the line drawing, comparing themselves. Skip no, 106. I don't know why the hell I'm scrolling down things. So 106, nor is the said beginning an arbitrary and only temporary assumption, or something which seems to be an arbitrary and temporary presupposition. Okay, Luke Fontes. So immediacy is a closed loop of being? Yes. 100% exactly. Because in the, true immediacy is the closed loop of being, because in closing the loop, you have the connection of me, myself, and I through what? Through myself, because I am the activity that mediated the whole thing. So it's immediate. You know, the mediation of mediation is self-mediation, which is just immediacy. So 106, nor is the said beginning an arbitrary and only temporary assumption, or something which seems to be an arbitrary and tentative presupposition, but of which it is subsequently shown that to make it the starting point was indeed the right thing to do. This is not as when we are instructed to make certain constructions in order to aid the proof of a geometrical theorem, and only in retrospect, in the course of the proof, does it become apparent that we did well to draw precisely these lines, and then in the proof itself to begin by comparing them or the enclosed angles, though the line drawing or the comparing themselves escape conceptual comprehension. All right, let me read that real quick. So, nor is the said beginning an arbitrary and only temporary assumption, or something which seems to be an arbitrary and tentative as presupposition, but of which it is subsequently shown that to make it the starting point was indeed the right thing to do. This is not as when we are instructed to make a certain construction. So in case you're still under the illusion that this beginning that we're going to make with being is hypothetical, he's telling you here it's not. One, because we're going to show that there's the closure of the loop of being. Two, because even before we make that closure, we have completely sound reason as to why this is the beginning. This is not like the comparison he's making here is like mathematics in geometry. The Pythagorean triangle proof. Let me get an image on here. Let me get you the classic squares proof. So in the classical Pythagorean theorem, to prove, a squared plus b equals c squared, or that, there's this certain determinate relationship between the cathedrices, which are the straight lines, and the hypotenuse, which is the angled line. One of the proofs that Pythagoras came up with, well, supposedly, we don't know that Pythagoras did, is to construct squares along these and then to compare the squares. And in comparing the squares, yep, you get a determinate ratio that always stays the same. That a squared plus b squared always equals c squared. There's nothing about a fucking triangle that tells you to do this. How he figured this out? Probably some angel told him, you know. Some higher being just gave him inspiration. Because otherwise, like, how the hell would you figure this out? It's just like a gigantic spitball in the park of, like, well, you know, let's try this, see if it works. See if something comes out of it. Hegel comments on this in the preface of the Phenomenology of Spirit, and he says, in this, there's nothing about relationship of squares to the lines of a triangle. What you're really doing is you're making a complete hypothesis with no basis, really. Just saying, well, this might work out. Let's just try something. And it has really ultimately nothing to do with the triangle itself. The relationship ends up being true about the triangle, but this construction of the squares themselves have nothing to do with the triangle as a triangle. And indeed, that's why there are various Pythagorean proofs. Some of them are using the triangle, some of them are using the squares, some of them don't. Some of them are just purely analytical math, you know, purely numerical. And some of them are different geometrical proofs. But in each case, whether it's a pure mathematical theorem or whether it's a geometrical construction, none of them have anything to do with triangles at all. They just happen to work out. But Hegel's saying he's not doing anything like that. He's not just spitballing a solution here. It's not just like, well, we kind of made a correct guess and this was the right guess. Not at all. We know where to begin. Let me check the time. 1:57. All right. We'll get to the next section on beginning as such, and then we'll stop there. So 107. So we have just given right within science itself the reason why in pure science the beginning is made with pure being. This pure being is the unity into which pure knowledge returns, or if this knowledge as form is itself still to be kept distinct from its unity, then pure being is also its content. It is in this respect that this pure being, this absolute immediate, is just as absolutely mediated. However, just because it is here at the beginning, it is just as essential that it should be taken in the one-sidedness of being purely immediate. If it were not this pure indeterminacy, if it were determined, it would be taken as something mediated, would already be carried further than itself. A determinate something has the character of an other with respect to a first. It thus lies in the nature of a beginning itself, that it should be being and nothing else. There is no need, therefore, of other preparations to enter philosophy, no need of further reflections or access points. 107. So let me read that again. So we have just given right within science itself. I mean, that's kind of an odd to say. Well, he's referring to stuff that's in being scientifically derived in the phenomenology of spirit. So we've already got scientific reasons, but even if we don't appeal to that, and as a matter of reasoning itself, we can make some deductions about like why it's got to be this way. It has to be this way. He's already talked about, well, you know, a beginning is a beginning. Well, actually, he's going to go like on a beginning as such in 109, about like a beginning is a beginning. It's like the whole thing about presupposing anything before it or having anything before it will make absolutely no sense. So we could just know already that we begin with the purely immediate. But since the reason why in pure science the beginning is made with pure being, this pure being is the unity into which pure knowledge returns. So, you know, pure knowledge is, but it's just the relation of knowing to knowing, and there's no distinction of knower and known, and so it's just immediacy. That's one thing for you. Being is immediate immediacy. Something to consider. This pure being is the unity to which pure knowledge returns, or if this knowledge as form is itself still to be kept distinct from its unity, then pure being is also its content. So if you consider being as the form, well, you can't keep it distinct because it's self-mediated, it's immediate. So the form is the content itself, no problem. It is in this respect that this pure being, this absolutely immediate, is just as absolutely mediated. So it's mediated, one, because we've gone through the process of getting to pure knowledge in the first place, and second, because, well, it's the same thing, just mediating itself. So it is mediated, but it's a mediation that, makes no difference. However, just because it is here as the beginning, it is just as essential that it should be taken in the one-sidedness of being purely immediate. So, to begin is just to make the first step. The first step is not to mediate. The first step is to establish there is, whatever there is. Not how it is, not why it is, just that it is. And indeed, that's what we got. Being, it is. And it's not even it, it's just being, isness. If it were not this pure indeterminacy, if it were determined, it would be taken as something mediated. It would already be carried further than itself. A determinate something has the character of an other with respect to a first. Determinate here meaning, when you have something determinate, it has a termination point. So it's got a beginning and it's got an end. And if it's got a beginning and an end, where it ends, something else begins. And if it's got a beginning, something else ended. Hegel's very literal with his words. It thus lies in the nature of a beginning itself that it should be being and nothing else. There is no need, therefore, of other preparations to enter philosophy, no need of further reflections or access points. It's that easy. There you go, you got the proof. 108. Nor can we derive a more specific determination or a more positive content for the beginning of philosophy from the fact that it is such a beginning. For here at the beginning, where the fact itself is not yet at hand, philosophy is an empty word, a received and yet unjustified notion. Pure knowledge yields only this negative determination, namely that the beginning ought to be abstract. If pure being is taken as the content of pure knowledge, then the latter must step back from its content, allowing it free play and without determining it further. So even if you maintain the standpoint of consciousness saying, well, I am the knower of being, well, the aim is to know being, not to know how I know being or to know about myself knowing being. Get yourself out of the way. You're going to know being, so just focus on being. Forget about yourself. And in that way, it's abstract. You're putting being away from any context which it would be in. Oh, where is this? Nor is there anything else present, any content whatever that would be used. Where was it? If pure being is taken as the content of pure knowledge, then the latter must step back from its content, allowing it free play without determining further. Or again, as much as pure being is to be considered as the unity into which knowledge has collapsed, when at the highest point of union with its objectification, knowledge has then disappeared into this unity, leaving behind no distinction from it, and hence no determination for it. So if the knower and the known are the exact same thing, then the whole object-subject distinction is completely worthless. There's no point in calling it knowledge. You just have the determinacy of what is. Nor is there anything else present, any content whatever, that could be used to make a more determinate beginning with it. You just have an immediate relationship, which is no relationship at all. So that's that. All right, next section is on beginning as such. We'll start that the next time. I hope that for those of you who watch this and listen to it, this has been very helpful. I haven't gone over this for quite a long time. I think it's about being close to a decade. But it's good to come back on this stuff close to a decade later, because so much of this stuff is just way clearer, for me. And I probably saw a lot of this stuff way back when, as well. But I hadn't gone through the trouble of rereading this publicly since then. And I have a completely different style. You can listen to Holgate's lectures or Richard Dean Winfield's lectures or anybody else's lectures, and you can tell that I have a different take and way of explaining this stuff, and I find other stuff interesting than they do, and so I think that this provides a good foil. I wouldn't say that the way that I'm introducing this thing is like infinitely superior, but in many ways I do think it is superior, and in many ways some of what they do is superior to what I'm doing because they're focusing on different things. So this gives you well, hopefully a more rounded experience of learning about this work. My focus is more on just like getting this stuff in a more sensible, everyday sense for people. To not fall within representation, but you notice that I like to give the examples of like these circular structures and diagrams and whatnot because I think they're very helpful. I think a lot of this stuff is mystified in a way by people just being obstinate and focusing too much on the abstraction of language, then trying to show you like reality's just this way, man. there's nothing alien about this. It's not weird at all. The weirdness is that we don't see it this way, frankly. Once you see it this way, you're like, yeah, like why did it take so long for people to notice it? But anyways, I forget every time. Please hit that like, share this around. This is made to help people understand this stuff, and it'd be nice for people to view it, to know that it's there. Anyways, till next time, probably tomorrow, hopefully, we'll finish this. And I'll see about finishing the introduction to the phenomenology as well. We're about halfway there too, and so one more session, and that should finish the introduction. So afterwards, I might do a proper commentary reading on absolute knowledge. Now that I've gone through and thought about it in depth for one pass at least, and I'll have a lot more substantive things to say than when I did my first pass, and that will be very helpful because nobody else has a commentary on this shit. Nobody else has a commentary on absolute knowing. I'm going to be the only guy besides Sadler. But honestly, Sadler does not have to say anything close to what I'm saying.